2008 financial crash, we were running surpluses, not deficits, surpluses. We actually had more money, we weren't in deficit. What plunged us into deficit was that brutal recession that brutal financial collapse on Wall Street, which led to the worldwide recession, which we're still suffering from, right? And yet the funny thing is, people have asked Jim Flaherty, the finance minister, well, why don't you tax the banks to pay for some of that recession? And you know what his response is? He says, our banks weren't responsible for the Wall Street crash, so it wouldn't be fair to punish them. Well, were we responsible for the Wall Street crash? Why are we getting punished? Enough is enough. And let me just quickly say, it's also a false crisis because, in fact, our deficit situations are not nearly as bad as they're made out to be. Our deficit GDP ratios are good compared to other countries these days, and in fact, we don't have the problem of high interest rates that made the deficit more of a problem in the 90s. So the crisis is a false crisis designed to justify delivering the cuts. And let me just conclude by saying that, of course, the solution that they never look to, and the one that would actually solve the problem, is raising taxes on the rich. Yeah! Because, first of all, that's where all the money's gone, right? In the last 30 years, all the income gains have gone to the top. And at the same time as all the income gains have gone to the top, taxes on the people at the top have fallen dramatically. So the money's just accumulating up there. They're not investing it. They have no reason to invest it because ordinary people's incomes aren't growing, so there's nothing for them to invest to sell to ordinary people.
Sex trade is growing.
Sorry?
Sex trade is growing.
Sex trade is growing, yes. We have casinos are growing, the sex trade, all that kind of thing. Anyway, what Neil Brooks and I argue in our book, and Neil Brooks is a professor of tax policy at Osgood, knows the tax system inside out, and we argue for much higher taxes on the rich. Quickly, we argue that the top marginal tax rate in Canada is now 46%. By the way, in the early post-war period, when we had much higher economic growth and much more equality, the top taxes on the top marginal tax rate on the rich were roughly double what they are today. So there's lots of room to put those rates back up. We argue, for instance, that on incomes over 500,000, can you imagine an income of 500,000? They should pay rates and taxes at 60%. Above 2.5 million, and there are people making that, they should pay tax at the rate of 70%. And do you realize if we instituted just those two higher taxes, which would only affect the 0.1% of Canadians, a tiny, tiny group, we could raise an extra $8 billion a year. Woo! Okay, and then I'll just leave you with this final idea. Because the other, apart from corporate taxes, the other idea that never gets enough attention is bringing back the inheritance tax. We used to have an inheritance tax in Canada, but we don't have it anymore. It was quietly canceled in the early 1970s. If we were to bring that back, it would only affect the top 1% in Canada. And by the way, most Western nations have one, so we're unusual not having one. If we brought that back, we'd have enough revenue that we'd be able to set up educational trust funds for every Canadian child, so that by taxing the very richest of the rich once a generation, there'd be enough money so that every child in Canada, when they turn 16, could have $16,000 deposited into their educational trust fund to be used exclusively for education and training. Imagine what that would do for us as a country in terms of not just improving our productivity and developing our resources, but improving and making this a much fairer, more equal country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Linda. One of the reports that has been developed by the Ontario provincial government to try to outline their various cutbacks and austerity measures is the Drummond report. Anton Smolsky, who is a member of Occupy Sudbury, is now going to tell us a little bit about the horror stories in that report.
Thank you, Linda. Hey, folks. So, did anybody cheer when the Liberals got their minority government last elections? Anyone? I cheered. Okay. So much for that, huh? Because I can't imagine, what's his face, Tim Hudak of Conservatives doing a better job than McGuinty pushing the right-wing agenda. Basically, this budget that's coming up next week is the result of a report, an advisory report, written by a former TD Bank executive, hired by McGuinty to do three things. To project the economic and fiscal situation of Ontario for the next decade or so, to advise how spending can be cut, and one more thing, a third thing, which is a non-thing. He was asked specifically not to avoid looking at the tax policy of Ontario. So cutting spending, which means cutting services to all of you, is fair game. Looking at tax laws, raising taxes on those who can afford to pay them, out of the question. All right? How did he fare? Yes. How did he do? He did great with his mandate, okay? Okay, so the first thing that he did about what our deficits are like, he exaggerates them consistently. He predicts that in 5 years our deficit is going to be twice as what it is now, about $30 billion, okay? To give you perspective, 2010 deficit was 14 billion. This is the last year we have data for. We know what the deficit was, 14 billion. The 1 year before that, the government projected that the deficit was going to be $24 billion. Oops!
What were the bank profits?
Oh, we're coming to that.
With the $24 million deficit, I mean, what will the bank profits be?
Enormous.
Yeah.
Right? So, oops, $8 billion, just sort of a little mistake, no problem. So, how is he planning to deal with this fantastic, unrealistic budget deficit? Well, 3,400 government jobs are going to be cut in Ontario, okay? Right, yeah. We're going to close down hospitals, fire nurses. Oh, they're going to cut teachers' sick days. How's that? Ooh. Raise tuition fees on students.
We already have.
Some more. Cut social assistance and benefits, all right? How about tax policy? Since Harris in mid-90s, 96, since his tax cuts, Ontario's losing about 16 billion each year in revenues. That's the projected deficit for this fiscal year, okay? What did McGuinty say in mid-90s to the Conservative government when they were proposing those cuts? I actually have a quote. He said, "What Conservatives are asking us to do is to cut corporate income taxes by $2.3 billion. That means closing hospitals, firing nurses, cutting education." That was then. What about now? Well, he refuses to even talk
about raising corporate tax, okay? Taxing corporations that are sitting on enormous capital reserves. Enormous reserves that they're not spending. They're not putting back into Ontario economy. Why? Because the Ontario economy, the market situation is not that good. It's a recession. There's no demand. So it worth their while more to just sit on all that money. What does McGuinty want to do instead? He wants to tax all of us. They don't call it a tax. It's a word game that they play. It's semantics, okay? They want to cut your services and subsidies to the services that you need and use to be productive in this society, okay? The more you spend on taking the bus, on fees, the less you have to spend to be productive, to spend in the economy. So what he's doing, what the Liberals want to do, is actually slow the economy of Ontario down, slow the recovery. How does that make sense?
Doesn't.
It doesn't. There are two reasons for that. I probably don't have time to get in the second one, but one of them is very simple. McGuinty government does not want to let a good crisis go to waste. Okay? They want the middle classes, the working classes, the poor to be so impoverished, to become so disempowered, so desperate, that the people will agree to work for less wages for longer hours. Okay? This is what austerity is. This is class war. They want the people of Canada to be more like people in China or Vietnam, where they don't have rights, can work for $2 a day, and then some. Certainly they can't get us there that quickly, but it's a start, it's a step in that direction, okay? But what we must remember is that these services and social provisions that our government does with the taxes is not some kind of privilege to be handed off when times are tough, or some kind of entitlement, or some kind of perk. These services are rights, okay? These services are rights because we live in a democratic and very wealthy society. And this is what we're here gathered for. To fight for our rights. And this is not the last, not the first, not the last time the government, the 1%, the capital, the forces that are aligned against us have heard from us. We are the 99%.
Thanks, Anton. Our next speaker is a member of provincial parliament with the NDP party for the Nickel Belt region, and she's worked with the Ontario Coalition Against Replacement Workers, or as I like to call them, SCABs. I'd like to introduce Gélinas.
Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. As it was mentioned, my name is Gélinas, and I'm the MPP, the Member of Provincial Parliament for the riding of Nickel Belt. I know that with the Occupy movement, and when people talk about politicians, they tend to paint us all with the same brush. I must say that sometimes I'm not too proud of what's going on at Queen's Park, but I represent the NDP. At the core of our party, we put everything that we do through a lens of social justice and share in prosperity. When you use a lens that puts social justice at the front and that puts share in prosperity at the front, you end up with very different policy. There is no way we would roll back OW rates. There is no way we would tax 50% if you go out and earn a little bit of money while you're on ODSP on OW. This is wrong. The lady was talking a minute ago that the richer of the richest of Canada don't get taxed 50% when they make millions of dollars of income. But when the poorest in our community who get their $595 OW check and have to make it last for a month, goes out and get a job that gives him $200 more a month, you know how much he gets to keep? 50% of it. We tax those people 50%, but we wouldn't dare do this to the millionaire, but we do this to the poorest in our society. We have a budget coming in Ontario on Tuesday. We've already been warned about austerity, which is a catchphrase that means we're about to stick it to the people at the bottom of the income ladder. Again, it's not the people who work for a living, the people who, by no fault of their own, ended up needing a little bit of help from their government. They did not cause the mess that we're in. You're not the one who put us $16 billion in deficit for this year, who put us $120 billion accumulated deficit. This had nothing to do with any one of you here. It had to do with greed at the top. But when we ask the McGuinty government, we don't even ask him to tax them. We ask, cancel the upcoming tax break that you're about to give them. Because did you know that on July 1st of 2012, in a couple of months from now, we're going to roll back corporate taxes. We're going to give them back $1.8 billion in tax cuts, mainly to the banks and to the insurance company. This is a shame. It is a shame. It's not equitable. It's not fair. We're being told that we're in a deficit and everybody has to do their share. Why is it that everybody exclude the people at the top? They need to be doing their share. We need to cancel those tax cuts, and I could go on. The budget will come out on Tuesday. Make sure that you are heard. Because a budget is stable does not mean that it's accepted. There are opportunities to make changes. Get informed, talk to me, connect with your MPP, and tell him or tell me what you would like to see in the Ontario budget. If some of it is as egregious as I expect it to be, we will do our best to change it so that everybody gets to share in the prosperity of a very rich province that is Ontario. Ça m'a fait plaisir d'être ici avec vous cet après-midi. Je sais que je suis une politicienne, puis les politiciennes, on a la réputation parce qu'on le mérite. Il y a beaucoup de mes collègues, quand je les entends parler, j'ai honte. Mais on n'est pas tous pareils. On ne croit pas tous dans les mêmes valeurs. Si vous avez besoin d'aide, venez me voir. Je vais essayer de vous aider le mieux que je peux. On est élus pour aller à Queen's Park, mais on est élus également pour aider les gens de notre comté. Ça, c'est la job d'un politicien et d'une politicienne, d'aider les gens dans notre comté. Si je peux vous aider, ça va me faire plaisir. Merci. Have a good walk.
Thanks, folks. We're now going to be hearing from Silver Tongue. in terms of musical performance, getting us thinking about going out on the streets.
Alrighty. I'm just going to do a quick sound check for our beats here, and then I'll get into something.
Hey, Gary.